Why did men stop wearing hats? Hats, hats, hats. One of my favorite subjects. Of course, I'm wearing a hat. And before we start, a disclaimer. Hat etiquette. There are those who say, oh, Prof, don't wear a hat indoors. It's far more nuanced than that. Very, very short primer on hat etiquette. Hats obviously are worn outdoors, but hats may be worn indoors in a public place or, sort of a public thoroughfare. And what do you mean by a public thoroughfare? Bus stations, train stations, airports, hotel lobbies, and things of that nature. It's a mark of respect to take your hat off when you go into someone's private home or in a private space. However, if you're in a public arena or in public space, of course, even if it's a covered environment, it's very appropriate to wear a hat. And so, as it refers to your own dear Prof, I'm in a very, very public place. I am on stage, quite frankly, or quite literally. I am performing on stage and I am a performer. This is my stage, as is everywhere else I am seen on social media. And so it is quite proper and appropriate for me to have a hat on my stage. So with that out of the way, why did men stop wearing hats? Well, legend has it that men wore hats really up until the 50s, certainly after the war. Before the war, surely, a hat was absolutely de rigueur. It was necessary. Every man had to have a hat. I'm sure we've all seen old footage and images. And it continued till after the war. The one incident, and this is just sort of what I call sort of old wives' tale. The one incident that changed this all was Kennedy's inauguration in 1960. It is believed that President Kennedy, because he did not wear a hat, strangely enough, he wore a proper morning dress for his inauguration. I believe he was in proper morning dress, and he left out the hat. And Kennedy was young. He was a handsome young man. He was sort of a symbol to a lot of young men. Even a sex symbol, because he was just very handsome and very rakish. And so a lot of people took cue, a lot of young men took cue from that. If you remember back then, a lot of fashion was driven less by media and less by the brands than by actual individuals. Key figures in the public eye were the drivers of fashion of the day. And so when someone like a Kennedy, who was looked up to by a lot of young people and actually looked at as a symbol, refused or sort of decided not to wear a hat, it was taken as a license by a lot of young people to do away or to discard entirely the hat. So that is the legend, so to speak, or the old wives' tale. Now, is there any real truth to that? You could also argue that coincided with the 60s, which is synonymous with rebellion. For those of you who have studied the 60s or who grew up, some of you older gentlemen who grew up in the 60s or who were young enough to remember the 60s, remember that it was marked with a lot of rebellion. It was marked with a lot of anarchy. That was when all the social change, civil rights, women's rights, burning bras, and all sorts of things, the, flower generation, free love, what have you. So it was an era marked with significant social change. And a lot of that change was also represented or sort of was captured in the way people presented themselves. And so they wanted to do away with anything that seemed or looked like tradition. And so that was sort of where even the suits sort of started to die a gradual death. I wouldn't say a gradual death, but, it sort of became less of a man's outfit, or sort of a man's typical outfit. People could now wear jeans, denim, and all other sorts of things. lumberjack shirts, what have you, grow out their beards. You didn't have to shave. And all the things that marked the traditional man, being clean shaven, wearing a hat, wearing a proper suit, wearing, those things where there was a lot of pushback by this new rebellious generation. And I think the hat probably fell victim to that era as well. And that was when men sort of took license to stop wearing hats. So, depending on who you choose to believe, you could sort of believe the Kennedy fable, or you could sort of see the discarding of the hat as sort of part of a broader movement, part of a broader social revolution, which occurred somewhere, sort of between the early 60s and I'd say sort of early 70s up to the mid 70s. So that's my own understanding of it, of how the hat sort of disappeared from everyday, every man's, or sort of the man's everyday regalia. However, there are some of us who are diehards, of course. I didn't grow up seeing a lot of men wearing hats. But as with everything in life, as you get older, you develop your own philosophy, which includes tailored clothing. And then you find your own voice, you find your own style, you find what works for you. And for me personally, it was an epiphany when I started to wear hats, it was quite an epiphany because personally, now I'm not trying to impose that on anyone, but I just don't think any outfit looks complete without a hat. It's sort of the hat and the shoes that sort of bookend. There's somebody who once said that if you want to understand if a man has true style, or if a man truly, if you understand sort of the self-worth of a man, look at the quality of his hat and the quality of his shoes. They could choose to wear, I wouldn't say cheap clothes, but inexpensive clothes. But look at their shoes and their hat, sort of the bookends, right, of the body, the top and the bottom. And those actually, they're areas where men who know how to dress, at least sort of who hold themselves in high esteem, do not spare any expenses. So that's about it for the hat, or the history of the hat, and how and why men stopped wearing hats. Thank you, Prof.